The 2022 NFL Draft is in the books, and well, we have thoughts on the Bengals' 6 selections. We'll give an overview on them, plus dive into their day 3 picks, including, get this, Jake, an offensive player.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Bengals podcast, a post-draft edition. He's Jake Liscow. I'm James Rapien. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow wherever you get your podcast. We're the only daily Bengals podcast. So if you're new here, well, welcome, and make sure that you get us 5 times a week. We've done way more than 5 shows this week, but usually it's 5 times a week wherever you get your podcasts. And let's dive into things, because we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to give you a draft overview today. We're going to go over the 3 picks the Bengals made on day 3 of the NFL draft. And we'll mention the undrafted free agents that they've agreed to terms with as we record this on Saturday evening. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. And Jake, let's dive into it, because the Bengals, if you would have told me that they didn't add picks and in fact subtracted 2 picks and only end up with 6 players in the 2022 NFL draft, I probably would have laughed at you, maybe called you crazy, because this is pretty unprecedented for the Bengals. And yet here we are. They traded up again on day 3 after trading up on day 2, and they end up with 6 players. That's one of the more surprising things, I think, about this draft class to me.
Yeah, I think that's the craziest thing, maybe, when I look at it, or maybe the second craziest thing. But trading up for 2 players in the second round, and as you mentioned, in the 5th round for Tycen Anderson, who we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, that's wild. It tells you a couple things. 1, there might have been some gaps in their draft board. 2, I don't think they thought the end of this draft was very good, because they traded away their 6th round pick and their early 7th round pick to move up. And they have, of course, dabbled in the undrafted free agent market. But man, that to me is the craziest thing. The second craziest thing to me, James, is the balance of players. I thought we would see several offensive players picked today. The way it fell, the run on tight ends before the Bengals got to pick, they get 1 offensive lineman and end up with 5 total defensive players.
It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah.
Maybe Brian Callahan just didn't want to talk to us much. And they're like, hey, let's just do undrafted offensive players. We'll stick to that. And obviously I say that kidding. It's wild. Maybe they just hate me because they know offense. Maybe they were listening last week when I said 3 straight offensive players over 3 straight defensive players. But overall, like I look at it in that all 5 defensive players to me are at least pretty good athletes. They're not all elite athletes. Some of them tested like that, even their 7th round pick and Jeffrey Gunter. But higher end athletes, above average, and production. I mean, a lot of them produced, and Gunter produced, and I get it. It's a 7th rounder, but there is some production there. It's not like you're just taking traits and that's it. And so I think that was a common theme. They wanted to get faster, bigger, athletic as possible on defense. And they added guys that I think that can help in that department. On the other side of things, man, I see holes on offense, and I wonder where they're going to come from. Is there a 4th receiver on this team? I don't think so. Not one that I feel confident in taking significant reps on offense. Gunner, special teams, sure, right? And then outside of Hayden Hurst, who it's not like he's the world's best run blocker at tight end, who do you trust in that tight end room? And I know, Drew Sample. But those are 2 major holes. And I haven't even got to the offensive line part yet, because I figured we'll talk about that when we talk about the Bengals' 4th round pick. But yeah, those are 2 pretty large size holes that we expected them to at least address one, and they didn't address either one.
And I think they probably wanted to at least draft a tight end. And I think they probably were considering a wide receiver. We talked about, they met with a lot of those guys late in the process that were looking like 7th round picks for undrafted free agents. So we'll see who they sign. They've already signed 1 undrafted free agent wide receiver as of now, and we'll talk about those guys later on. but I imagine there will be more than the one they've signed so far. The good thing about these holes you're talking about, James, is that they're mostly depth holes. They're, like you said yesterday when we were talking about day 2, pretty happy with their starters. And so they're looking for guys that they can develop, looking for guys that could be rotational pieces. And sometimes interior offensive linemen that you draft in the 4th round turn into Clint Bowling. And I'm not saying that Cordell Volson necessarily will, but sometimes you draft
Call
Clint
your
Bowling.
shot right now. You want to be a Bengals legend, Jake? Call your shot right now. Say it's Clint Bowling 2.0. Do it.
We don't have him in our spreadsheet, so I cannot do such a thing. You mentioned
we as in you and Joe do not have
Yes.
him. I didn't have him in mine either because I didn't do a spreadsheet. But yeah, it was surprising to say the least, right? That was a surprising pick.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But you mentioned something I wanted to touch on really quick before we dive into the specifics. A very athletic class. Overall, you mentioned this, and with the RAS scores, you talked about it. Daxton Hill, 93, 93rd percentile. Cam Taylor-Britt, 83rd percentile with that 4.3840. Zach Carter, 81 RAS. Pretty good athlete. Cordell Volson, if you run his numbers at guard from his pro day, not his combine numbers, and not at tackle, because he's not going to play tackle for the Bengals, ends up at 93.5, which is much better than his combine numbers would lead you to believe. Tycen Anderson, 95th percentile athlete, another 4.3 something 40. And Jeffrey Gunter, you mentioned, 97.6 on the RAS scale. So all these guys, pretty athletic. And in the secondary in particular, they added a ton of speed. And we'll talk about these guys specifically, I guess, but versatility as well when we look at the secondary. We'll talk about that when we talk about Tycen Anderson.
Yeah, freak. And that's a good point about, moving it to guard and looking at it that way. But clearly they had a profile of what they were wanting to attack. And I asked Zach about it afterwards, and he's like, well, it starts with the tape, right? And you see the plays on tape, and then you check the test. And that's great. But you know what's even better than plays on tape? When everything lines up. And when those numbers and measurables and traits and all those things that you're looking for matches the tape. So it's not like, oh, well, we're taking this risk because, oh, yeah, maybe it's a small school guy. But let's just use Gunter because for a second, maybe it's a small school guy, but at least he tested at a high level, right? And so, I think it's time. You want to dive into these guys? We can dive into these guys, starting with.
I got one other trend I want to just point out. Just one other observation. One other thing I noticed. Dax Hill is the only young, like specifically young player they drafted.
It's an older class. A lot of them are 22, 23. Yeah.
Cam Taylor-Britt, 22.5. And the rest of these guys are 23, essentially. Zach Carter just turned 23. Cordell Volson turns 24 before the season starts. Tycen Anderson and Jeffrey Gunter both turned 23 in like the next month. So get ready to wish them happy birthday. But older, athletic, and mostly, as you mentioned, James, productive draft class for the Bengals here.
And that's the thing is I think part of that might have just had to do with the COVID year. I mean, you look at the prospects in general, it felt, it's like, man, this is an old class. Like to a point where 22 wasn't as scary as it would be normally. It's like, oh, there's 24-year-olds in this class, and so that's
a lot of them.
That's a good point there about the age, because when I look up their age, it's one of the first things I do when I do that initial write-up. And there was a lot of 22, almost 23.
Yeah.
Or will be 23 when the season starts. So let's, you mentioned it, Cordell Volson. What is he going to bring to the Bengals offensive line? Are we talking about LG1, Clint Bowling 2.0, like Jake joked about? Well, we'll dive into him coming up next. But first, a word from BetOnline. I hope you listened to me and you went to BetOnline and you wagered on the 2022 NFL draft. Maybe you took the under on quarterbacks in the first round, or the under on quarterbacks being drafted in general, because holy smokes, maybe you took the over on wide receivers, but you're cashing in today. And that's the beauty of BetOnline, is you can wager on the 2022 NFL draft, or you could have, and made money. But don't delay, don't stop. Get in on the action right now, because NBA playoffs in full swing, Major League Baseball in full swing. Before you know it, the NFL is going to be rolling around here in, well, it still is. You want to bet on Joe Burrow to be MVP? You can do that and so much more in one spot. BetOnline, where they have all of the action in one spot. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device to sign up for free. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Fourth.
All right, Jake.
Yeah, go. Sorry.
Stepped on you. My fault. I didn't know. I didn't know if you were going or not. I was on a different screen. See, that's the beauty of a live show. Let's dive into a fourth round pick, Cordell Volson. North Dakota State. Not going to say I saw it coming. I didn't see it coming. We talked about Jemery Sawyer, Kennard from Kentucky. I mean, there were a couple offensive linemen that were still on the board for them. And they went with this kid that were like, what? Who is this guy? And, you look at different draft guides and it's like, oh, 6th round pick, and people are calling him this and that. What were your initial thoughts? Because we'll dive into it. Your initial thoughts though when he was picked. Was it like me? Who? Because it was who for me.
It was mostly who. Like I had seen his name in simulators, but that's it. Like I said, he wasn't in our sheet. So those were my initial thoughts. My second thoughts were, okay, they got an offensive lineman. He could compete. This is a range where you get interior offensive linemen that can start. You can get at this part of the draft. And clearly they had a different grade on Volson than consensus. The third thought was, well, he graded really well for PFF at North Dakota State. His last year, he was 23 years old and he was playing for North Dakota State, but he was the 10th highest graded tackle in the country on PFF's grading system. And that's with a pretty strong pass blocking performance as well, and a pretty strong zone run blocking performance. So not the greatest quality of competition. And he was probably at least a year older than a lot of the guys he went up against. But at least he was productive when he was on the field. And so that's something. And we'll see how he fits, right? Do we trust the Bengals to draft offensive linemen? Has been a big theme on Bengals Twitter. They have not gotten this right very often lately, and this is another one that does not go with consensus. That doesn't mean they're wrong. And there's a lot of reasons to think they might be right. And this could be a guy that's in the mix to start, but that's a long way away. When they draft Cordell Volson in the 4th round, that doesn't make me think they have a true challenger entering the competition for left guard. I'm sure he'll be in the mix, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, but let's see what happens. A couple things that stand out to me about this pick, and I posted video of Frank Pollock talking about it on Twitter if you want to check it out. But Cordell Volson is, comes from North Dakota State, and obviously they always have a ton of success and win a bunch of national championships and all that stuff. But the thing that Frank Pollock liked about him, because there's obviously a talent difference between watching, Georgia players or Cincinnati players or Ohio State players versus North Dakota State. He liked the system that they were running. And, he said they were running this pro style system where Volson had to do a lot of the things he's going to have to do here. And that's one of the reasons why they're like, oh, he could easily be a quality guard in the NFL. The other thing, and we'll get into this at least to a degree right now, his attitude. Praised his attitude like crazy and how hard he wanted to work and how he gauges that. And he said, and cover your ears if you have kids around, but he said, you got to have some shit to you. And that's the thing that he was looking for. And so I think that you mentioned the athleticism, all that stuff. I'm sure the Bengals were on board with this. I think this is a Frank Pollock guy. I think this is a guy that Pollock met with, talked with, that I know they did Zoom calls and watched on film. And he's like, man, I can work with this dude. And so I haven't felt that about all the offensive linemen that they drafted since Pollock has been around in 2018. I didn't necessarily fully feel that. Certainly didn't feel that last year when they drafted 3 of them. But this one, I think Frank Pollock's fingerprints are all over it. And that's me speculating. I'm not reporting that, but I think that this is his dude, that he's a big fan. So we'll see. We'll see if it works out. But I think he likes Volson a lot.
Yeah, we'll see how he develops him, because we need to see some offensive linemen develop under Frank Pollock's tutelage. We really like Frank Pollock, but we haven't. I mean,
he hasn't been here.
Yeah,
he hasn't been
right.
here.
And that's a fair point. I wanted to point out the recent history of offensive linemen to come out of North Dakota State. because there have been some good ones.
Yeah.
Billy Turner in 2014 was a guy that we talked about, I believe, at least a little bit when free agency was going around. Currently in Green Bay, I think, or was coming from Green Bay. Maybe I'm not remembering that correctly, but Joe Haig, another one, 2016 was a 5th round pick. And then Dylan Radins last year. We talked about him for the Bengals when we were looking at 2nd round offensive linemen. So some good players have come out of that program, and Cordell Volson will be the most recent. They're producing some NFL players. Christian Watson also picked in the 2nd round, of course. Trey Lance last year, number 3 overall. So this is a solid program, even if it isn't the SEC or the Big Ten or whatever your favorite conference is.
For sure. There's no doubt there. And I think when you're talking about the development, I think the attitude part of it, that's why I can get behind it, right? So it feels like a reach. Let's call it what it is. It feels like a reach. A lot of people were shocked by it or surprised. The last offensive lineman they picked where it was like, oh my God, you're reaching. Well, it was Jackson Carman. And I'm going to stick to that part of it. But obviously that didn't work. And the Bengals haven't built up the equity when it comes to trust us about offensive linemen,
right?
For anyone to buy in. And so the good news is like I said, that's why I wanted to point out, it feels like to me, Frank's like, oh no, this is the dude. And I didn't necessarily get that vibe last year, to be quite frank with you. So,
apparently he had a really good all-star game. He was at the East-West Shrine Bowl and drew praise from people in attendance there. One of them was PFF. Oh, what's his name? We've had him on our show. I'm not going to remember it.
Someone from Pro Football Focus. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the PFF guys really liked his Shrine Bowl because he was at the Shrine Bowl. The other thing that you mentioned, the attitude, shows up in the highlights. You look at the highlights that have been posted on Twitter of this guy, they're all him just punishing dudes, like pile driving them into the ground on running plays. And so that's fun, especially for what Frank Pollock's looking for. He's looking for that nasty, and this guy brings it.
And he's 6'6", 320. It's not like he's, a little guy or, and anything like that. Like he does have size. He gained weight when he needed to gain weight. And obviously he played mostly tackle, 37 starts at right tackle for the Bison, but was always going to move into the guard at this level. I think he knew that. So it's a guy that you hope that they know something that we don't. And the other part of this is, and I asked Brian Callen, did I ask? Yeah, he was answering my question. He thought that this guy was going to go off the board probably long before their 5th rounder. For what?
So did the Shrine Bowl director, Eric Edholm. He was saying late day 3, early day 4, like maybe late round 3, early round 4. Maybe he would get to day 3. And
gotcha.
The one thing, the last thing I'll note on him before you get your closing thoughts in here, the 6'6" is a bit of a problem for him. He's a big dude. And the most common thing that I've read about him so far is that he has trouble maintaining leverage just because he's so tall. And sometimes, we talked about natural leverage with Geno Atkins for a long time at 6 foot. You get guys underneath you because they're shorter than you, and low man tends to win in the trenches. Hard to stay low man when you're 6'6" going up against guys that are 6'2" all over the NFL.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. And so, we'll see. And we'll do our grades and everything. We're not grading today. We will certainly get to those grades though, but we have 2 more picks to talk about. Tycen Anderson, another safety. Was Jake Liscow surprised about that? Plus Jeffrey Gunter. Well, I think that man is on the Built Bar plan. And speaking of Built Bars, the number 1 protein bar on the planet. They're high in protein, they're low in sugar, they're low in calories, and they're covered in 100% chocolate. So basically they're awesome. And if you haven't tried a Built Bar yet, well, you need to. And right now you can get 15% off by going to built.com and using promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. And it isn't just Built Bars. It's also Built Puffs. What's a puff? It's a protein-infused marshmallow covered in chocolate. So think about that. Those are also high in protein. They're low in sugar. They're low in calories. So you can eat a chocolate-covered marshmallow and get the protein you're looking for. You can at built.com. Promo code LOCKED15. Again, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com.
On to the 5th round we go. the Bengals drafted a guy that when you read his scouting report, actually looks a lot like Dax Hill in some ways. In some specific ways,
Whoa.
there's some
Some.
skill overlap between the two in
Yeah.
terms of versatility, in terms of being that guy that's going to come down and cover tight ends, in terms of playing in the box a little bit. And I know I've cast some doubt over my thoughts about Dax Hill living in the box. More of a safety corner kind of guy who's going to be able to do some coverage. That's the similarity that I'm talking about. Also, they're both quite athletic. But Tycen Anderson out of Toledo grew up a Steelers fan, by the way, which I find fun. I like it when guys that are fans of rival teams end up on opposites in the NFL and then have to go beat the team they grew up rooting for. I think there's something
Yeah.
fun about that. I
Tyler
think
Boyd.
it makes him, yeah, Tyler Boyd, exactly. I think it makes it mean a little bit more to him, you know? But
Mhm.
Tycen Anderson was a guy that when we were putting together our mocks was a guy that I had in consideration if they didn't go safety early. And he
Mhm.
didn't make it into any of our mocks to my knowledge, but he was on the list of guys I was thinking about talking about in our predictive mock. I don't think he quite made the cut for our podcast, but not a guy I haven't heard of. So we got that going.
Yeah. No, I heard of him, and it kind of helps because I think this is more of a value. I think he was expected to go a little earlier, late day 2, early day 3, in that range. Has to wait till round 5. Bengals move up to get him, and to me, I think that this is, a lot of people are like, oh, Jesse Bates, could he be gone? Will he not be? All that stuff when they pick Dax Hill. I think that this is kind of confirmation that, all right, they're not keeping both safeties. And I think Tycen Anderson can do a lot of what they would ask Von Bell to do. And that doesn't mean Bell isn't going to be here this year, but he's a free agent to be after the 2022 season. I will say that Anderson this year, I think, is more of a special teams ace where he played all these special teams roles at Toledo. But the one common theme, man, he's the fastest of all these dudes. 4.36, ran the fastest 40-yard dash, is certainly someone that adds that elite athleticism like we talked about. So one, I love how he spells Tyson, Tycen. Threw me off the first time. I had seen his
Yeah.
name, but you just don't think about it. You're like, oh, Tycen Anderson. You type it in to get an image, and it's like, oh, nope,
No.
that just screwed me up. So thanks, Tyson. But no, I think I think it makes a lot of sense from a fit in Lou Anarumo's defense. But I think some people were like, really, another safety? And that probably caught him off guard because of the position, not necessarily the player.
And I feel that a little bit too, but when you get
Mm.
a play, like they're adding speed to the secondary, which was
Mhm.
clearly something they wanted to do here. They're adding athleticism to their defense. Again, clearly something they wanted to do. Anderson is bigger than Dax Hill, so worth noting that. I think he has about 20
He
pounds on him.
he's almost 6'2". He's like 6'1", and close to 6'2". Off the top of my head, I
Yeah.
can't remember the exact measurables. And 209.
And the other thing here that we talked about earlier, trading up again for another defensive back.
Mhm.
It's just really interesting to me that, again, they gave up a full pick to do it. And it wasn't a pick swap or anything. And
Well,
they ended up with 6 picks. I
and
mean,
and
the
I you
Cincinnati
know
Bengals. And so they must really like this kid, again, like they really like Cam Taylor-Britt.
and I think the other part of this is they're like, look, we don't have 8 spots. So, on the roster, like this is it. Like we know we should get quality over quantity. And I like that logic, right? Because you look at it, all these guys, maybe Gunter won't, and we'll talk about him in a second. The other 5 are making the roster. They're making the team. And so that's who wouldn't? Anderson?
No,
I
I'm
think Anderson's
saying
making the team.
they probably do. I think Volson will be interesting. We'll see what shakes out on the
Oh
offensive
my
line.
God. If they take an offense that you
Look,
anyways,
look, we're going to talk about the undrafted free agents tomorrow in more detail, but one of the undrafted free agents the Bengals signed on the offensive line was higher on Dane Brugler's board than Cordell Volson. And I know that media and team is different. There's a reason he was undrafted and a reason that your 4th round pick is probably making the team. but there are going to be a lot of guys in the mix. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that he's unlikely to make the team or anything like that. I'm just saying there's a lot of guys in the mix in the interior, and they could still re-sign Quentin Spain, although maybe that's less likely today than it was before.
Doesn't feel like it. Yeah, it doesn't feel like it, the vibe I get. And I didn't ask directly about Quentin Spain, just asked how comfortable they are with things. And by the way, even if they were re-signing Quentin Spain, if I'm them, I'd be like, oh yeah, things are great. Yeah, one of these guys going to emerge and kick everybody's ass and be great at left guard. So, I don't necessarily blame them for that. And how they may feel that way today and feel different tomorrow. That's just all part of the business, part of the NFL. But yeah, I think, man, if they got a 4th round pick for Ben Brown, who, spoiler alert, that would be wild. But you want to talk about the 7th rounder now?
Let's go to the 7th round. A guy that I have heard of, a guy they probably noticed last year when they were linked to a couple Coastal Carolina edge rushers.
Yep.
And one of 3 Coastal Carolina players, including undrafted free agents that will be part of this rookie class for the Bengals. Again, another spoiler there. Jeffrey Gunter, the edge rusher. He was our 17th rated edge rusher using the formula that we use. Ended up 96th overall on our board. Tycen Anderson, by the way, 123rd overall. And now this doesn't include quarterbacks, although there were 3 quarterbacks drafted or something.
Wasn't many.
It's crazy. I'm embellishing, but you get the idea. And we don't include running backs. We're missing some players. We didn't have Cordell Volson in there, for example. But Gunter had pretty good productivity, 70% market share productivity. He's a little bit older, so that brings his score down. Like we mentioned, he's almost 23 years old, but had really good athletic testing, like we talked about earlier, and was pretty good as far as PFF is concerned, especially in true pass rushing reps and on true pass rushing snaps, pass rush win rate at 32%. Pretty good. That's up there near the top of the class. And so a lot of things to like here. You read the PFF scouting report on him, really consistent. Never really took a step, wasn't as dominant as you would like to see at this level of competition. But clearly, if somebody can tap those tools with the testing that he did, that's a profile that you like to bet on in the 7th round.
No doubt. And he met with Marion Hobby multiple times, the Bengals defensive line coach, and they love him. They love him. And you look at that testing alone, and I'll tell you, he got on a conference call with us, and he was like so excited. Because once you get to the 7th round, you're Coastal Carolina, you test in the 97th percentile, but you're still there. You're thinking you're going undrafted. He was like, oh, I'm so happy. I could cry right now. He was like, who they think going to beat them back? Like he knew someone asked him who his favorite edge rushers were, and he was like, Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard, duh. And so
prepared.
It was, he was prepared, but he was so damn excited. And so when you get someone like that's been an underdog, think about if you go to Coastal Carolina, no one, but you feel like you're an underdog already from the jump because you're playing at Coastal Carolina. And if he does have that elite athleticism like the testing shows, then I think he's got a shot. And I didn't want to dismiss his, by the way, earlier, a few minutes ago, I'm not dismissing him from making the team. I think he's got a shot based on that. But 7th rounder, it's just like undrafted free agent. You're going to have a really impressive offseason, really impressive training camp.
Yeah, it'll be tough because they did draft Cam Sample as well last year. They're getting Joseph Osai back. They waited until the 7th round to take an edge rusher, but they drafted him. And so he certainly has a chance. I don't know too much more about him except he's got an athletic profile that you like to bet on. The bend part of his testing was the worst part of his testing, but really good explosion. And that's the kind of guy the Bengals tend to go after. Now, what's different than what the Bengals usually go after is he's smaller. He has long arms, 33-inch arms, which for his height, he's 6'4", 258. For his build is pretty long arms, but is a little bit smaller than their traditional edge rusher. So I think they're looking at him for a sub-package role because he had a great 10-yard split in his 40-yard dash, 98th percentile 10-yard split, and pretty good jumps, about 85th to 90th percentile jumps, which is another test, a vertical and broad jump that we use to measure an edge rusher or a defensive lineman's burst. It's just how much burst can they generate from their legs from standing, right? So those were really good for him and gives him that, can he get around the edge, or can he go speed to power on the edge? Because at his weight, he's probably the lightest defensive lineman on the team, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
258. Yeah, he's pretty lean. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be intriguing. I think he's got a shot, and we've talked about him some. Samori Toure. We had him mocked. I think that guy was in line too for this pick, and they looked at it, and one guy tested in the 97th percentile and had all this production. And Toure was good, but he didn't test as well. Ran a 4.48, ended up getting picked by the Packers. I think he would have signed here if he was an undrafted free agent, which we can get to in just a second. But yeah, I was like, oh, they went with another defensive player, because I thought for sure it was Toure. I had the whole story written, which you never do in the 7th round. It was the most sure I'd ever been about a 7th rounder in my life. And that didn't happen. So that's the beauty of covering the draft down here. But yeah, I think they made the right decision, because it looks like this guy has a real chance to stick and make the 53-man roster potentially. And the other guy you want to mention, Wyatt Hubert, obviously coming back from injury as well, so he's in the mix as well.
That's right. So it's going to be a crowded group trying to fight for some roster spots there on the defensive line, but they need the competition because they had depth issues last year, and we've talked a lot in this draft about the fact that we still need to see them figure out the pass rush and get that extra guy. And if this guy can do that, and this might be a lot like, who's the guy they had last preseason end up going to Miami, signed off the practice squad, had a great preseason.
Out of Purdue.
Darius Hodge.
Darius Hodge.
Yeah. Could be Darius Hodge 2.0, right? Where Darius Hodge could be back for all we know. I think he's still on a practice squad. So we'll see what shakes out there. Really quick, want to hit on some undrafted free agents, James. And tomorrow we'll have more on these guys. As we're recording this is about 8 p.m. Eastern time. And so we're probably going to miss some guys that you may have heard of by the time you listen to this or watch this. But we'll go through some of the guys that we've heard. One of them, Ben Brown, the offensive lineman that we've hinted at a few times, that Dane Brugler had a 4th to 5th round pick on, I believe. And Brandon Thorne really liked his value on day 3. Brandon Thorne, of course, an offensive line guy we refer to often, from Ole Miss, guard, center, versatile, very experienced, 24 years old. We'll see how he comes in and competes. A guy that certainly I think a lot of people expected to be drafted. And maybe the other very noteworthy, and we'll get to all of them, they signed a long snapper, James.
Yeah, no, they did. So yeah, those that are wondering about Clark Harris's future, Cal Adamus, and I'm probably Adamus, or I don't know how to say his last name, but he was the one draftable long snapper, and I could look it up on the Beast here on how to say his name, but we're talking on here. So yeah, and they're also signing Shamari Jones and Javon Heiligh, which again, Heiligh. You tell me.
Heilig's a great guess. Coastal Carolina.
Is it Heiligh, you think?
I think it's a great guess.
Yeah. Either way, both out of Coastal Carolina. Justin Miller reporting 3 of 4. I also have one more here. Georgia Tech offensive tackle Devin Cochran.
Yep.
Also signing with the Bengals. Has a wingspan of over 7 feet. So there you go. You want to talk about measurables? He is a tackle.
Yeah.
So
Cal Adamitis was out of
Adamitis. There
yep.
you go.
He's out of Pitt, not out of Coastal Carolina. The other Coastal Carolina rookie running back, Shermani Jones, signed with the Bengals. Tom Pelissero had that one. And the last one that I have seen is Field Yates, Kansas wide receiver Kwame Lassiter II has signed with the Bengals. And I quickly looked up his athleticism to see what 40 he ran a 4.52. Didn't test great, but we'll see what kind of role they have in mind for Lassiter. And those are all of the free agents I've seen so far.
Yep.
There will probably be a few more.
Yep, that's it. So that's it. So wild 6 picks. I definitely thought it would be 8 minimum, maybe more. Instead, the Bengals had 6. We'll give our grades on technically Monday's show. We'll do our grade, so make sure you stay tuned for that, and hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you haven't already. We're getting closer to double digits, Jake. I don't know if you've looked. Double digits subscribers, and we just launched YouTube. Well, it doesn't feel like that long ago. Also,
like 5 digits?
Yeah.
Well, double digits would be 10 subscribers. We're getting close to 5 digits, right?
Okay, I'm thinking thousands, double digit thousands.
Just making sure people know.
You're right, 5 digits. You're right. We're getting close to 9,000. But if you hit subscribe right now, we might be at 9,000. And so then we can start talking about that 10K mark. I was already thinking in thousands, so like 10K. Yeah. You're right. Technically 5 digits. Jake,
5 digits is more exciting than 2 to me. I don't know. You talk about money, more zeros is nice. Talk about subscriber, more zeros is nice.
Yep. All right. Well, that's fine. So 5 digits. So help us get there. Also follow wherever you get your podcasts. And all right, Jake, I know you're not feeling well, but you got to do your patented outro here on Locked On Bengals.
Yeah, let's get it done. The Bengals draft in the books, undrafted free agents underway. Like James said, we'll have grades tomorrow. We're going to have guests from guys like Nate Tice. We're working on scheduling a date for him. We got Mike Potts, I buried the lead again, the Bengals league college scout, coming on with us for Wednesday night's recording, and plenty more analysis about this Bengals draft class and all these undrafted free agents coming your way here on Locked On Bengals. And until next time, Bengals fans, hope you enjoyed the 2022 NFL draft. Hoo day, and have a good one.